3, 2, 1. Liberty Hangout.
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is Justin, the founder of libertyhangout.org, here at CPAC 2016. We are speaking with
Kyle, Foley.
Kyle. What do you think of the atmosphere here at CPAC 2016? What are your overall impressions?
Yes, this is my first time, and it's been absolutely incredible. There's a lot of people here, a lot of really interesting speakers, a lot of really cool booths to go around and see, so it's been really incredible.
Awesome. Who are you supporting in the 2016 election this year?
I'm a Marco Rubio supporter.
Awesome. Not awesome, actually. Anyway, I want to get into a little talk about political philosophy here.
Okay.
How would you define theft?
Theft is taking something that doesn't belong to you.
What is taxation?
Taxation is theft.
Then why are you supporting Marco Rubio?
Because we live in a country with a government, and if I wanted to live in a country without a government, without taxation, I'd go live in a land that wasn't occupied by a government. The problem is when you live in a country and you have things like you understand when you live in a country that you're going to have to sacrifice some of those things to live there, and that the only way to not have any of that is to live in complete anarchy, which you can do, but in America that's not the system that we have.
So if taxation is theft, then by what legitimate authority does the government have to perpetuate this theft if you and I can't get away with it?
Well, the problem is we're choosing to live in this country, and we're well aware that there are taxes, so in a sense it's not necessarily theft when we're kind of signing ourselves onto it when we are citizens of a country. So we're saying, look, I'm going to live here, I understand what happens. It's just like we understand there's laws for certain things, and again, if we don't like them, if we don't want to follow them, then we would have to go somewhere else.
So if a thief comes into my house and he starts robbing me of all my belongings, if I don't leave, is it not theft?
No, if you told the thief he could come into your house and do that, then he could do that.
I didn't tell the U.S. government to come into my house.
No, okay, here's the other problem. This would be if you walked into someone else's house, because the government's not walking into your house technically. Your house is within the realm of the government. So it's a little different than that.
So then under this philosophy then, would the government own all of the property, or does each individual own their own private property?
Individuals do own private property.
So then wouldn't it violate the law of contradictions to then believe that the government has jurisdiction over property that they do not rightfully own? If I can't come onto your property and dictate that you must do this in your house or else leave, then how can the government do this to individuals here?
I mean, it's the same thing we have with certain laws. For example, again, we want to talk about private property. You want to talk about, for example, a house. There's certain zoning laws, there's certain things you can only do in these certain areas, and those are laws that people have voted on, or at least people have voted on legislators that have pushed that legislation. So in a sense, it's all part of the democratic process. It's all part of democracy. We may not like it, and that's why we can push to change it through the democratic process. So we elect people, for example, I know libertarians, huge fans of Rand Paul. You elect people like Rand Paul who go in and you change this kind of stuff. That's the way in a democracy, that's the way you change those kind of things. The problem is we've allowed ourselves as citizens to be okay with a lot of this stuff through the electoral process, and the things we disagree with, we are not getting out there actively enough in the democratic process and electing people who will fight against the things that we don't like, with high taxes and those kind of things. I mean, you won't get me to say there shouldn't be any taxes, because we live under a government where sometimes that's required to function. It sucks, we don't like it, but that's kind of the trade-off for some of the protections and some of the things we get from the government. It's not like the government is just taking the money and not using it at all. However, they are using it poorly, and that's, again, why we elect people who are going to go in and make sure they're using our money the right way, and if not, we elect someone different, or we go somewhere else.
So it seems like what you're gauging at is that we should be using the political process in order to employ change in the United States. Do you think that there are any alternative solutions that we can try?
Not really that I could think of. I mean, the political process is the best way to do it. It's the easiest way to do it. And honestly, it's the way the country was founded, that's how we make the change, is through the political process.
Believe it or not, as early as 1812, Thomas Jefferson admitted that the American Republic is dead. And we've actually been trying to then vote our freedoms back for over 200 years to no avail for the most part. We see how big government has grown. So is this telling us that the political process isn't really prudent in affecting change? Is there something else that we should be looking towards?
No, the problem is, because we look at issues, and there are issues, and I will agree with you on that. The problem is, when I think about solutions, the biggest solutions are you get rid of government as a whole. And that's something that, as much as that, in an idealistic world, that's the perfect scenario. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world. It's very easy to say, I hate the government, I hate everything they do, let's get rid of them. It's not something you can necessarily go ahead and do. So you do have to make changes slowly and steadily. And the other part is, too, the way the world's evolving. I mean, there are things that are done. There are things that are done that are too far. There are also things that are done that I think are good.
Right. Now, you mentioned before that you believe that taxation is theft. Would you then agree that government is necessarily forced?
Can you clarify that question a little bit?
Is government coercive?
To an extent, yeah.
Okay, so then if we look at government as individuals, let's say government, let's get rid of the word government then. What exactly is it? Is it individuals employing force against other individuals?
The problem...
When we say that that's chaotic?
In a sense, but the problem is the individuals that are using that coercive force on individuals, they're individuals that we've chosen to give that authority to. We've elected and we've put them in that position. So it's easy to say...
Has everyone or have majorities?
The majority.
What right does the majority have to use this force against a minority?
Because that's the way our country has been formed. That's the way a democratic republic was formed. I mean, I get there's issues with it. I get it's not a perfect system of governance. However, it's, quite honestly, I believe the best system we've got. It's why America is, and I will say this proudly, the greatest country on earth because of the way our political system works. Yeah, it's not perfect for everyone. There are a lot of people who will disagree with a lot of the things that are done, a lot of things that are said on every side. But I think it's the best system to represent what the people want, what the people need. And again, it's not perfect. I hate government. I work for Turning Point USA. I know big government sucks. And we say that a lot, but we really believe it. So the idea is obviously to shrink it. It's not to completely dissolve it because there are things that a government does. And in our country, theoretically, and it's not always perfect in practice, but theoretically, the objective is to elect people who are going to represent us, who are also going to represent the Constitution to protect our rights, and who are going to understand how to get those two together and try to make it so that everybody is kind of included in the things that are done. Unfortunately, it's never going to be perfect. I wish it was. I wish it was a perfect world, but I really do think our government does a good job. For the most part. There are obviously a lot of things they do wrong.
Now, when you said that the goal is to diminish government as small as possible, I agree with you 100% there. Now, when should we stop? If we get it to a point, can't we keep reducing it to the point where it's insignificant and we can let market forces and free people take over?
No, because so I've had this discussion with people before about anarcho-capitalism where they say that's the best kind of society to live in. The problem is you end up creating governments within that own society because you have social contracts, you have contracts that you're signing to deal with things. That, in a sense, will form its own type of government. It's completely different than what we see as government, but it does form its own type of government, which then will have the same flaws, and it all boils down to, realistically, human nature and human flaws. But when you have that kind of society where there's no... So look in the United States, we were to completely remove the federal government. There was no more government. It was just individuals. We would start entering contracts with each other. Well, eventually we'd enter into contracts with a lot of people. Well, then we'd probably have someone who was kind of organizing that contract. Then we'd have people who were in charge of making sure that contract is enforced, because you have to enforce the contract. You can't just have a contract that people can break.
It seems like you believe that in the absence of the state, some sort of monopoly on a court system would arise. Is this really going to be the case, or are we going to see competing defense firms and courts as we see in the food industry, the clothing industry, technology, et cetera, et cetera?
I mean, it's all theoretical because we've never seen this system in practice.
I'll give you that.
So theoretically, that's something we could see. However, I do believe that in human nature there is a natural, I don't want to say evil because it sounds too nefarious, but human nature is kind of what's best for myself. What can I do that's better for me? People are going to inherently do that. You're going to have corruption. You're going to have all these things. And then, again, it may be under the guise of corporation, but it will, in a sense, be its own government. It will be its own form of oppressing people at some variety. And so the idea is that we have a government that allows those things to still exist, but kind of monitors them and makes sure that they're not being oppressive to the people that are under that governance. If you get rid of the government completely and it's just those corporations, and again, I love the free market. I'm not trying to sound like a Bernie Sanders person here because I don't like the idea of completely, you're watching every single thing a company does. However, there are some things, if we look in our history, child labor, for example, was a good thing for us to fight back against, I would argue, because there were 9-year-old children dying in factories, and we've now gotten to the point where that's unacceptable. And that's one of the things where you don't necessarily have that in a type of anarcho-capitalist world where it's just running off of these social contracts. Then that would be my argument for that.
You don't think that people would have an incentive to not shop at companies that would be employing these tactics here?
Yeah.
What incentive would a company have to hire a child knowing that people may voluntarily remove their dollars from them? Just look at, let's take, for example, our co-founder just recently wrote an article saying that if you want better tacos, privatize the courts. Very interesting title. And so essentially he was arguing how if we look at something like Chipotle, we saw just how much that E. coli scandal affected their shares. It plummeted. So why wouldn't we expect the same thing in a society where it's much more decentralized and competition is flourishing like never before?
Yeah, so here's something. So say we don't have a government and I run a McDonald's. I own many of them. We don't have anyone who's coming in and inspecting. There's no type of health inspector. I'm going to cover up everything that I do wrong.
No health inspector found the E. coli. That was the market.
I'm aware, but that's okay. So nobody discovers it. Somebody finally does discover it. What's to stop me from forcing people to buy my stuff? Because if I enter a contract with a defense contractor, with a military force, what's to stop me from using them to force other citizens to then come in and give me their money in exchange for product, or maybe not even in exchange for product? Maybe I could just hire this force to come in and extort people. There's nothing that can stop me from that either, and I think that's morally wrong.
If that's your stance, then I believe you should be against every single government on earth because that tool is already in place.
I'm aware, but there are also good things the government does, and so you look at it, and again, in a sense, what you have there is still a form of government. It's just not called government.
Kyle, I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
It's a real pleasure. I think you're close to libertarianism. Just a matter of realizing that the market can achieve things much more efficiently than the government.
Theoretically, but yes.
Thanks a bunch, Kyle. Make sure you guys check out libertyhangout.org. And Kyle, where do you write for?
I write for Outset magazine.
Make sure you guys check that out. Check out Kyle's articles. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you share if you like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more great content. And check out libertyhangout.org for some awesome liberty-minded material from a great lineup of writers.